Hi, my name is Emily Grandstaff-Rice. I am the president of the Boston Society of Architects and an associate at Cambridge 7 Associates. I was the keynote speaker at Equity by Design in San Francisco this past weekend. My talk centered on four central topics: celebrating women in architecture, equity is for everyone, our greatest power is our voice, and what is our value. So what I spoke about was celebrating women in architecture. Within architecture culture, when we see a woman succeed, it's both a celebration but a reminder to women of our special status. So we as a culture need to be careful in our desire to acknowledge that when we hold individuals so high on a gender pedestal that they feel pressure to represent all women in the profession, just as there's many color swatches in the palette for us to choose from, there's many women in the profession of architecture. And we need to be careful that we don't mistakenly take one and have them represent all, because there are many different types of architecture and ways to practice and individuals in the profession. And equity is for everyone. The concept that there is one perfect pathway to practicing architecture, i.e. the traditional firm setting, denies the experience of those of us who have charted our own path for the flexibility, significance, or team camaraderie that frankly keep us in architecture. We need to get to a place where we can discuss gender and racial diversity by way of observation and acknowledgement rather than accusation. This is why I viewed the Equity by Design survey results and the symposium as a huge step forward in the equity conversation. I also spoke a little bit about how we need to acknowledge the generational rift amongst women in these discussions. Saying that inequity isn't as big of a problem today as it was 20 years ago may be true, but then again, it is still a struggle. At my daughter's preschool, they have a phrase, "Don't hurt other people's hard work," meaning don't criticize others knowing that other people's hard work is hard work, dismissing the concerns of emerging professionals on the inequity issue because the numbers are trending positive creates undue resentment. We should acknowledge the hard work of all, understanding that hard work will always be a relative term. Each one of us has our own agency and our own voice. While there are many mediums, Twitter, writing, speaking, design, collaboration, our voice is a way of communicating experience. When my 4-year-old daughter has something to say, I know it. She's found her voice, sometimes too loud. But my husband likes to say, she got that from me, her mother. As a group, using our collective individual stories to describe a new practice where differences in working are celebrated, where achievement is not tied to the hours and number worked, where flexibility is seen as an asset, where teamwork and collaboration is the norm, and where we change people's lives. What is our value? The value of an architect is measured more than the height or square footage of a space, but in its moments, orchestrating architects' connection between activity and action, evoking the human emotional palette, and creating comfort to touch our hearts, minds, and bodies. Our engagement is a key value proposition, so we, men and women, need to engage the profession and the public about good design, but also diversity and equity in architecture. Be bold and explicit. Why does architecture matter? Why is what you are working on change people's lives? Why does equity in architecture matter? Use your voice. This is how we eat the whale, one bite at a time. Until our profession reflects the society we serve, we will not have completely fulfilled our potential. Our work is not done, but then again, when is architecture ever done? That is its beauty. Emily Grandstaff-Rice, president of the BSA and associate at Cambridge 7 Associates.
Welcome to the Archispeak podcast. The podcast is for architects by architects, where we discuss all things about architecture. I'm Neil Pan. Each episode, Evan Troxel, Cormac Phelan, and me invite you in on the conversation as we talk about everything in the profession, both the good and the bad. Maybe you're considering a career in architecture. You're still in school, or you've been around the block more times than you'd like to admit. Join us in the studio as we gather around the water cooler and talk about this profession we call architecture. It's time for some Archispeak.
It's time for some Archispeak.
It's time for some Archispeak.
I don't even know how to read that.
I died in South Africa, only outlined my body in Tiffany blue. When I died, I drove right in and swam with the dolphins and Lisa Frank and you.
Welcome to episode 47 of the Archispeak podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel. I'm Comic Villain.
This show is sponsored by Wall Protects and Boinobots. We'll talk more about them later in the show. First, we have some friends of the show to announce.
The first friend of the show is John Gregg. He contributed $11.11. John is from Toronto, Canada. Thank you, John.
Our second friend of the show is Jordan Bales, who donated $10, and he's also up in Canada, but he's in Ottawa. I've been to Canada. Thanks, Jordan, for being a repeat friend of the show.
So tonight we have a special guest, Rosa Sheng, with us. And so say hi, Rosa.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
So, Rosa, you are here because you are representing the missing 32%. You kind of coordinated that effort. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and kind of why you're here for starters tonight?
Okay. So the missing 32% was a symposium that started about 3 years ago, and it came into conversation when Architect Barbie, of all things, came into production, and there was actually a lobbying effort by a lot of women architects about why she should be the next, career Barbie. So that actually was this interesting conversation of what her role was, to future women architects, and it brought to question. There was a research finding that was done early on about how men and women start off graduating from architecture schools roughly at 50-50. The exact number changes, obviously, but that compared with the people that actually end up staying in the profession, the AIA had a survey number where the firm leadership and licensed architects that were AIA members were 18%. So if you do the math really quickly, 50 minus 18, that gave you 32%. And that actually started before I got involved. So there was 3 symposiums, this being the third most recently, but the 2 before, I was actually involved in the one that happened last year. And I was actually a last minute speaker for a panel on negotiations. And it was a point where in my own career, I think I felt like I reached the glass ceiling. I was questioning whether or not I wanted to stay in the profession. And somebody approached me who was a colleague of mine and said, you should really come and speak at this panel. It'll be great for you to kind of, purport your skills or, share your insights on the profession. And I did it. And it was funny because it was on my birthday. And I thought, heck, work-life balance, what am I doing going to a symposium on my birthday? But that changed my life in a way that I never thought possible. And that was that people actually took the advice that I gave to heart. And as a follow-up, they'd call me up or send me emails, take me out to lunch and say, this is something really important. You've positively influenced me and how I view my career as a woman in architecture. And, these things aren't talked about on a daily basis or at all. It's just once a year. So why isn't there something, an AIA committee or what have you that talks about these issues? So I asked the question stupidly to the AIA executive director at the time, why isn't there an AIA committee on women in architecture? And she said, well, I've been asking that question for 12 years, and you're the first person that's actually come back and, kind of volunteered. So at that point, I was like, oh, great.
You didn't know you were volunteering.
What did I get myself into?
Yeah.
So at the symposium this year, I kind of made it a visualization of a book I had read, Shel Silverstein. I don't know if you guys had read that book in your youth. called Where the Sidewalk Ends.
Yeah.
And there's a poem in there, very visual. There's this little girl named Melinda May who says she's going to eat this giant whale. So there's this huge whale on a table and there's this little girl. And everybody's laughing at her and saying, "Oh, you eat this whale, ha, 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 not possible." And she, indignantly said she would. It took her 89 years to eat that whale. So on the second page, there's the little old 89-year-old lady, or however old she was, 95. And then there's this big carcass of a whale finally eaten up because she said she would do it. So at the time that I said, "Yes, let's start this thing," I felt like, oh gosh, I've committed to eating the whale by myself, and I have no idea how I'm going to start doing this. But to my surprise, there are a lot of people that just came out of the woodwork when I said, "Okay, I'm starting this committee. First meeting is, in July on this date." And about 25 people showed up. And again, it just keeps resonating with the fact that there is a need, and, people didn't have a forum and they felt strongly about coming together and trying to solve some of these challenges, that we'll talk about a little bit later. So that was a year ago. And since then, it's been this whirlwind, wild ride of what are we doing? And okay, how are we going to get that done?
So you started a survey, right?
Yes, we did.
And
that was our mission.
So tell us a little bit about the survey, and then I want to get into some of the results that were revealed at the Equity by Design conference in October.
Sure. So our fundamental mission for forming the committee was that we weren't going to just be women in architecture, and it wasn't like a little powwow group. We were actually going to fill a need, which was that there was a lack of data on a bunch of these issues. A lot of it was anecdotal in why people leave architecture, but there was never a thorough survey done. So we were basically a startup. We had never done a survey before. We had to educate ourselves a lot about how to do a survey. We had to find a research partner, which was really hard to do because, we're this little engine, we're a brand new committee, and nobody had heard of us before, never done a survey before. So a lot of people turned us down. We went to the big research houses like Catalyst and LinkedIn. And finally, it just happened that I had done a project at Mills College in Oakland, and there was a business school, and one of the professors, Dr. Eric Evenhouse, we kept in touch, and I was actually doing a tour of the building for Girl Scouts, and he was there. We talked about me wanting to do the survey to find out more about why people leave architecture, and he had this perfect solution, which was that his students needed a research project, and we had the data. So it was a connection by happenstance. And then we obviously wanted to pay them for their effort, because they're going through school, they needed to make ends meet. But we got it, at a very affordable level versus having to pay an expensive fee for a professional research house to do it. So it's kind of like the little blue engine story that could. And we, again, didn't know how. So we started our survey design on SurveyMonkey. We had a great core team of architects and women architects in AIA that formed the design of the survey, the questions that came out of it. And very early on, we had seen other surveys done by Architects Journal and an Australian survey as well that kind of focused more on, a causal of, how do you feel, about being discriminated against? Do you feel discriminated against? And we wanted to change that. We didn't want people to feel that, one, this was a survey just for women. We want it to be about men and women in architecture because men are leaving too. It's not just women leaving. So we designed it in a way where the first question was, are you a man or a woman? We just got that out of the way. And then each of the questions sections, there are primarily three. One was on hiring and retention. One was on growth and development. And then the last one was about meaning and influence. Why are you an architect, period? And there were about 90 questions. The way we disseminated the survey was originally thinking, we'll just concentrate on the Bay Area. But what happened was word of mouth got out, and a couple of friends on the East Coast said, "No, you should, launch this nationally. We think that it would resonate with a lot of people." So we launched it through Twitter, and we used our website to kind of promote it, and it kind of caught on wildfire. At first, it was, "Oh, we'll be lucky if we get 1,000, respondents." And then when it went over 1,000, we thought, "Oh, we'll just be happy with whatever we get." And we ended up with 2,289 respondents nationally. And if you go to the Architect Magazine website, they actually did this fun interactive map, which shows, how many people in each state responded. So you can actually see the breakdown. And there's a lot of naysayers that say, well, it's not statistically valid. The way you conducted the survey was grassroots and it was self-selecting. So yes, the people that responded, 60% approximately were women, 40% were men. But we say, hey, you know what? We don't care how we got the information. The fact that you had almost 2,300 people respond to the survey is case in point that there's something wrong here, or people wouldn't be responding at that rate or care, right?
Yeah. It's obviously an issue. There's that passion. You can sense it.
Definitely. So that was conducted in February, and it took us, about 6 months to actually process the information, because obviously we're not the experts and kind of learning by doing. But we finally got it all together in time for the symposium to share with everybody.
So we'll have links in the show notes to go and look at the Missing 32% project, which is at themissing32%.com. So you can probably look at that information in a little more detail. But Rosa, I'd like to ask you kind of what are the things that what are the things that stood out to you with all of the data that came back? What are the 2 or 3 things that really kind of maybe surprised you with the information that came back from the survey?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, we asked a question about when, if people left architecture, when they were leaving. And the answer to that was actually, in layers. So within the first 3 years, we saw the largest number of people leave, both men and women. And I don't have the exact percentages here, but on our infographics, the longest bar on each side was in that 0 to 3 year period. So we've identified what we call pinch points of, key times during one's career when people leave, and that's pinch point number 1. And then the reason why they said they were leaving primarily was satisfaction. The lack of engagement. We obviously know that there's long hours and low pay involved when you first get out of school, and the disconnect between what you think you're going to be doing and what you actually end up doing, right, is a point of dissatisfaction for most that causes them to leave.
Those are a few topics I know we've touched on in the past on the show, but I'm curious, how is that any different today than a number of years ago? I mean, when I first got out of school, as Cormac would say, in the dark ages, when we still drew on stone tablets, those were the same things. I mean, there was a disconnect between what you did in school, and that seems to persist today, according to the information in the survey. And it doesn't surprise me too much to hear that that's oftentimes when people leave the profession because of that satisfaction. It seems like the most people that are going to stay in the profession are those that are willing to get through that period of time where there is low pay and long hours. Is kind of putting in your time. I know the millennials episode we did kind of spoke to that, where they weren't interested in doing that. So I'm curious, from the equity side, how are women maybe disproportionately affected by these pinch points?
Yes. So that one, the first one we called paying your dues, which is similar to what you've been saying. But I think that one is the most gender neutral of the pinch points. The other pinch points occur later on in the career, the mid-career point in particular, licensure being one of the ones that we focused on of a determinant of whether or not people stayed in the profession. And beyond that, there was another pinch point called caregiving, which is basically from the 10 to 15 year mark. And again, we tried to share that as not just being parents, but that's a point where you're either taking care of somebody else, namely your spouse, or you could be taking care of an elderly parent or a relative. And that's all, happening in that later mid to late career point. And then finally, there's what we call the glass ceiling, which we find fundamentally affects more women than it does men. And in all these categories, it starts out with various factors, but licensure, for instance, at the time that it's taken longer and longer to get licensed, as we've seen with NCARB by numbers. They have some really comprehensive data about the average time it takes for somebody to get licensed out of school. And right now it's in that 7 to 10 year period. And that's also the period when life events happen or start happening. People get established. There's a trajectory that we saw in a lot of the different questions we asked about, what is your salary? What is your position in the firm? Are you a firm leader? Are you the principal in your firm? And in each of those graphs that you'll see on the infographics, basically, it seems, even though there's a gender gap in salary of about $4,000, we see that gap widen at that 10 to 15 year juncture. We see that with firm leadership and, being promoted to a principal leadership position, again, roughly equal, men doing slightly better or women doing slightly better. But then at that 10 to 15 year point, it shifts drastically where the gap widens to, anywhere between 15 and 20%. And particularly for principals, it gets even wider, up to 30% difference between men and women at the worst.
All right, let's take a minute away from the show to talk about the first sponsor this week, who is Wall Protects. Once again, they're back with another sponsorship for Archispeak, and we really appreciate it. And what we would love everyone to do is to head on over to Wall Protects, that is wallprotects with an X at the end of it, .com, where you can see their commercial wall protection products. If you're doing any kind of commercial project where you need high-end wall protection that is innovative, customizable, and durable, so if you're doing healthcare projects, if you're doing school projects, if you're doing civic work, anything where you need durable stuff against the walls, definitely check them out. They've got a team of dedicated in-house engineers and manufacturers, and not to mention over 70 customizable colors and styles to make your visions a reality. So we would love it if you would go over to wallprotects.com. Again, that's wallprotects with an X, and check out what they've got to offer. And let them know that you heard about them on Archispeak. We would appreciate that very much. Thanks, Wall Protects, for sponsoring Archispeak. And now, back to the show.
I was going to ask, did any of the data or other information gleaned from the symposium even kind of shed any light on why there's this glass? I mean, I shouldn't say that. Why? I mean, we all know there's a glass ceiling.
Yes.
I'm really curious to get at why and how do we break?
Yes.
Yeah. What are some of the sources of that glass ceiling and this difference? Now, obviously, if somebody takes time out, and I know when I first started one of the firms I worked for, there was a woman who had worked there before, came back a number of years later, say after raising, what she did is she raised her children for a little while, for several years, and then ended up coming back. Now, it seems fairly obvious maybe that maybe there's a gap there in experience and maybe what you're being paid because you don't have the same amount of years in that maybe somebody who stayed in the profession. Now that I don't know if that's that may not necessarily be a wrong thing, but it's just maybe more of a fact, and not maybe gender specific, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how do women break through that barrier? And specifically, was there any information that kind of came out of the symposium, even that might give us some clues?
Yes. I've been doing a lot of reading this past year, and constantly keeping up with not just architecture, but what is happening across all industries, namely business driven or tech driven. Right now, there's tons of articles about implicit bias. And there's extensive research on implicit bias, and that being, it's not just discrimination. Used to be what people called, blatant discrimination against other employees. That's not the case anymore. It's not intentional in most cases. One could say it's actually the fact that we have primal instincts, and that those instincts of us gravitating towards people that are like us, or survival, if you will, now transpiring into, how we judge people at work. And so Google did an experiment, and it's actually documented in the New York Times, about hidden bias or implicit bias. And there's a fascinating website and a test you could take called Project Implicit, that's done by Harvard, that actually challenges, people that think that they don't have any implicit bias, but in fact, we all have some, men and women both. And even more fascinating is the fact that women have implicit bias against other women. So it's something that I think may or may not be known by most people, but knowing is half the battle. Knowing that, from the point of hiring somebody, there was the study done where even just the resume and the name on the resume, and this is actually less about gender, more about just cultural diversity, that if you had an ethnic name, you are less likely to be called in for an interview than if you had a traditional, Anglo-Saxon name. Right.
Wow.
So that was fascinating. Yeah.
So you're like starting off with like one hand tied behind your back, just based on your name. So you thank your parents then. Or
not even just your name, your school, where you came from, right? We tend to gravitate towards people that went to the same architecture school or worked at the same firms, or, people that right? And up until a certain point, that's all great and good, because we like people that are like ourselves, right? The more that they're like us, the more comfortable we feel, like we have some kind of connection with them out of the sea of people that we don't know, right? So it's the self-selection thing of survival where we gravitate towards that. But how, when it impacts hiring and when it impacts promotion, and, how do we typically think about women in the workplace? Are women leaders? I think part of that implicit bias carries into, well, women are nurturers, or women are this, or women are that, but do people implicitly see women as leaders? And I think the answer, sadly, right now is no. In your basic, unconscious, right? And that comes out in these like little micro actions. And again, it's not a blatant like, well, she's a bad architect, or she's not as skilled as the guy is, or, that's the default thing to say, well, he's advancing because he is more skilled. But there's this bind that happens. I think you may or may not have heard this in being assertive. If you're in the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, she outlined it in a couple of these anecdotes. But if you're too assertive, people find you not likable, that you're aggressive. Right. And if you're not assertive enough, then you're not confident, you're not, a leader, right? So it's constantly riding that line that a lot of people have challenges with. And how do you do it in a way that doesn't prevent you from advancing, just by skill alone? Or, what are the key traits that you need to have the secret sauce, if you will, that the principal factor, or the,
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I've worked for many women architects as the principal of the firm in the past, and one of the first firms that I worked for right out of school, she had an uncanny ability to be able to land the projects for us. And she was a good, strong leader.
Mm-hmm.
But you could assume what the perception of her was, is that she was either a ball buster or a, this or that. And we'll keep it nice and clean.
Yes.
But that was the impression. And she was just a good, competent leader, a good, competent architect, a good person to, learn from. But the perception is because she was successful, well, what she did to get up there. And, it's a sad, I don't want to call it a fact, but I mean, it is a sad fact that that's a perception that a lot of people have. It's either, you said it best, that they're either a strong, leader, but they have this, perception tag to them, or if they consciously, and because I've known, some friends of mine who are fellow project managers that are, strong women, that they consciously decided to kind of, play back a little bit. Yes. And not, be too assertive because of that perception.
That's right.
And it worked against them, so it was almost a double-edged sword. It was, if you're too assertive, they think you're this way, and it kind of works against you. And if you kind of sit back so that you're not overly assertive to not have that, one perception, now you're on a, she's just not, she's a weaker leader than, we really wanted, or
right.
or something like that. And, and it's an unfortunate, because right now, I tend to, in our office, I'm the project manager that tends to be the guy where all of the new kids coming out of school are, I get them. And
you're a good teacher, Cormac.
And a lot of times, I try, and so far in the past, since I've been working there for 5 years now, I've had, working on my team, 3 guys and 5 women. And 2 of the girls just went back to get their graduate degree. And the whole time I worked getting them out into the field, mm-hmm. kind of showing them the ropes, kind of really trying to show them what we've talked about in the past, and you touched on it earlier, this kind of gap between what we're taught in school and what we're what the reality of the profession sometimes is, and there's that big gap between them. And then so what I'm trying to do is prepare them for understanding that, unfortunately, the design and construction industry today is still a boys' club.
Yes.
So
sadly.
Get out there and take a look at how it works. Look at it, with as critical of an eye as you can, and figure out how to break past all of that. And that's what, I've tried, and, I don't know if I'm successful. They're all still in the profession, thankfully. Yay. And even the 2 that went back to school, they're planning on sticking it out, because they're more than capable. In fact, they've got a quality to them that most of the guys that worked with me don't possess, nor I think are capable of possessing, because it's just, I think they went into the profession or went into school knowing that, they were different because they were women in a profession that seems to be mostly dominated by men, that, they were really going to try to, push past that, because this is what they wanted to do.
Yes. Yes. So another part of our initiatives, if you will, is, yes, there is a problem with, you might say, well, I'm just going to throw in the towel if that's the case. I don't want to ride the line my entire career. But then there's the banding together and bringing together best practices, or how do you get beyond that, that perception, or how do you do the workaround? So part of our goal is to have this idea sharing, and the one solution that comes about from getting past that, riding the fence, are you a leader or are you too assertive or passive, is to actually have build relationships with not only mentors, but we're calling them champions. They're called sponsors in business, but sponsors feels like somebody who's paying you money or something. So we're calling them champions, and these are people that are at a leadership level above you. That's probably your project manager or the project architect that you can learn from. But then they're also going up to bat for you when there is a promotion or review. You form an allegiance with them, and you purposely seek them out and say, listen, I know it's tough being out there, but I think I can really learn from you. Can you watch my back? Do you have my back? And of course there's it's not just the person who's asking for this champion who's getting all the perks, but the person working under them actually makes the project manager look good in turn. So they're working really hard, making sure they're doing all the things that they're supposed to be doing. But then there's this system where that's actually being acknowledged. So when it comes time for a review, your champion, your project manager, man or woman, would say, well, I think you should know that Ashley or Pam over here has done this amazing job. You might not have noticed, but I'm going to point it out for you and I'm going to tell you why. And having that person speak for you as an advocate is much more effective than you speaking out for yourself. Because when you speak out for yourself, sometimes it sounds like, oh, they're tooting their own horn again, or, what have you, they're bragging. But so much more powerful when a champion speaks out for you and can confirm the amazing work that you've done. And even a client, that's the ultimate champion, right? When the client seeks you out and says, I have to have X or Y person on my job, men or women, because they just did this phenomenal thing, and I want to work with them again. That speaks multitudes more than you trying to lobby for yourself.
That's a great idea. I mean, we should all do that more often, and have these champions, men or women.
And they could be your peers too. They don't necessarily have to be a higher up. Obviously, it's more strategic if they're in a leadership position, but just your peers saying, that you've worked well as a team or that you're collaborative, that helps a lot.
So, Rosa, is that something that you recommend that somebody seek someone else out at their firm and go and ask them to be that person?
Definitely. Yeah. I think it's definitely something that has to be intentional. Sometimes it happens naturally, but in most cases, we see that the natural mentor relationships happen with men and men, because there's the natural affinity of whatever it is. Let's say because they're in the majority, you go out for the beer, or you have your, whatever, fantasy football or your golf game, that is a natural way for the bonding to happen. But men and women have a more awkward relationship of sorts, right? Where people might think, oh, they're dating or whatever it is, but that's not necessarily the case. But if you keep it like above board and official, in a more slightly more formal in a way to start out with, I think that kind of intentionality helps with any kind of dispose any one of these, water cooler gossip things that might happen.
So if you're a firm owner, or say somebody higher up in a larger firm, listening to this, this is something that you should try and make happen officially at your firm, so that it's not like somebody has to feel like they have to take it upon themselves to go and ask for this, champion. If you're listening to this, take it upon yourself to get out in your firm and make it a priority for the, for staff to do this. So that it isn't seen as, like the one person at the firm, like, hey, I'd really like to have this champion, and it may seem awkward at first, but if you kind of make it the procedure, how things work in the firm, and that person, that champion, say, is in your, your review, Now, normally, I remember the larger firm I used to work for, when we had our reviews, oftentimes it was like our principal in charge or the project manager we worked for would be in that interview as well. And they kind of acted sort of as your champion.
Right.
We didn't really call it that at the time, but that's sort of what they were there for. So I encourage anybody listening to this, if you're in that position in a firm, make this the standard. Make this the way you do your reviews and the way you encourage your staff to grow and have it get more experience and be more involved, because it's only going to be beneficial for your firm.
That's
then
right.
you don't have the people leaving after 3 years or 5 years.
Well, it's not necessarily just about that, firm specific, but, you encourage people to be the champion, or you be that support at every level, like what you're talking about, Rosa. You're actually bettering the profession, which is, kind of harkens back to what you were talking about with the, which we probably may not have time to talk about it, but, I found it interesting when you were, all these little key areas of when people were leaving the profession, and early on I can kind of see, because I've seen it, with interns that I've worked with in the past, how they are very disillusioned at the profession. Oh, this wasn't what I was expecting. I wanted to do something more exciting and, and all of this other stuff. But, if you have this, mentoring or, champion involved with their development, as well as the own, it's kind of helps with the champion's development as well, and so on. It just kind of helps strengthen the knowledge base profession-wide.
All right, it's time for our second sponsor of the show, and we've got a brand new sponsor this week, who is Bueno Box. And who is Bueno Box? Bueno Box is a company that aids firms in the process of transitioning into, you know what's coming here, Revit architecture. They provide a wide range of Revit services that include training, template creation, advanced family modeling, standards, and library implementation. They also provide realistic renderings, animations, and real-time walkthroughs, so they offer it all. They've helped many architecture firms transition from AutoCAD to Revit, and they understand the importance of integrating your current standards and workflows. They are designers as well and understand how important the process is. Their renderings allow them to act as an extension of the design process by giving your client the ability to easily explore many options very quickly, side by side with the design. And if you're beyond the beginning stages of Revit, they offer lots of other services as well. And if you go to their website and check it out, click on the BIM Services tab, you can see all the other things that they do. So if you know your way around Revit, but you don't want to spend your time creating custom Revit families, they do that. If you don't want to spend your time doing 3D visualization, they do that. They also have tons of other stuff, so check it out on the Bueno Box website. So if you're interested in exploring what they have to offer, visit buenobox.com or send them an email at info@buenobox.com, and their links will be in our show notes as well. Thanks, Bueno Box, for sponsoring Archispeak. And as a side note to all you listeners out there, if you could go check out our sponsors this week, we would really appreciate that. They have stepped up and become the first sponsors of this show in the early stages here. And we want to give them as much love as we can. So go to buenobox.com, go to wallprotects.com, and check out what they have to offer and see if it really works for you. And then we would love to hear what you think about them. All right? So that's just a side note. Check them out. And now we return back to the episode. But going back to something that you said earlier, Rosa, too, about the hiring and the names and the, where you're from, what city you're located in, all those things that you have that implicit bias. That's just absolutely crazy to me. And I think this is another thing that firm owners and leaders need to be challenged by, is the cultural differences that we have at our fingertips here, with the possibility of all of these different cultures and genders and everybody coming together. The more diverse your project team is, the better your project is going to be. And it is absolutely crazy to me that people look for people like themselves to work on a project, to do the creative work that we do. I've seen it time and time again with the women that I work with, bring a completely different perspective that always makes the project better. And there's several women that I work with every single day, and I'm always blown away by how they think of things that I would never think of. And it's like, who doesn't want this, right? It's absolutely crazy to me, because we work in such a creative profession, and all of the jobs that are spread out through all the different levels of production and design and technical and management and everything, there is so much opportunity there to be creative, that anybody's different perspective is going to help that situation, not hinder it. So I wanted to say that because I think that needs to change. Like, architecture has to get its house in order. And the only way we're going to start doing that is by hiring people the right way. And then women need role models that are higher up in these firms.
That's right.
And I feel like there's so many firms out there who don't have a really good role model to look at. Now, there are a couple of really good examples. And when I went to the Monterey Design Conference last year up there in Asilomar, there was, actually it was 3 years ago now, when Jeannie Gang was there, and then Odile Deck was there last year. There's so many great lecturers that are women. Man, they get me so excited about architecture. And I feel like if we can get those types of people into our firms who are just, natural visionary leaders, and I know that's asking, I mean, there aren't that many of those people, period. But getting them in the right place and nurturing those people into those positions is so important for women to be able to have that role model, so that it's okay for them to be who they are, right?
That's right. Well, it's the pipeline issue.
Yeah.
If we don't start keeping them, it always ends up that by the time you get past all these pinch points, what are you left with? You're left with 18%, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there is a whole permission mentality, right? Where people are waiting for permission to do things. And I think the older generation that I think, Cormac, you were kind of speaking toward, there was a generation of women who had to kick ass to get to the point that they, that they got to.
Absolutely.
I don't know that it's necessarily like that as much anymore, but I don't know. It just,
I don't
maybe
know
there is, but
admit it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because there probably still is, the holdovers and everything. But, you're right.
Yes.
And that does leave a bad taste in anybody's mouth who works with those people. Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Well, let me throw this out there, because, we're talking about this, and it just reminded me. Today, I was out on a job site. Project manager from the school is a woman, and we're walking the site. And it was so cool because, this is a phase while occupied project, which means that the kids are still walking through the construction site and everything else. And it was so cool because these three little girls, as they're walking by us to go to lunch, they're like, are you a girl construction lady? And and she's like, well, yes, I am. And they're like, that's cool. And I could hear them as they were walking by. It's like, I think I want to do that.
That's awesome.
That, to be able to just hear and see that one little thing, it's being able to break down what is the perceived barriers from early on. It's like, well, girls can't do that. No, girls can do that. And, for them to just say, hey, I want to do that too. It was great. I loved it. So, you catch them early and you say, you can do anything.
Yeah, well, and we have daughters, right? And
right.
I mean, that's a constant thing that we're always talking about in our house. It's definitely top of mind, and I don't know if it's a requirement to have daughters to think like that. I definitely don't think it is, but it's more present in my family's conversations, and so I feel like maybe we care about this a little bit more, because we have some skin in the game. But
that's right. And we have 2 daughters, and my husband is a champion, for them as well, and for myself, because it's a partnership. At the end of the day, ultimately, women can't do it alone. Women need men to be in the game, as you've said, and I think that's why we came up with the name Equity by Design, because equity is for everyone.
Yeah,
it's not just a women's issue. Right. Everybody has skin in this to be successful, like you've mentioned before. And something else I wanted to bring up about the survey that was really fascinating was the negotiation question. So we asked, have you ever negotiated, a salary offer when you weren't satisfied with the what was given to you? And you'd think, well, men probably negotiate more, women negotiate less. But in fact, in aggregate, very few people negotiated. Both men and women negotiated about the same. But for when you're comparing the salary of negotiators versus non-negotiators, negotiators, by and large, always have the higher salaries. And, squeaky wheel gets,
that's a good lesson right there. Yeah.
Right.
That when I'm doing it wrong.
Yes.
Yeah. And I would say the same thing when it comes to, just satisfaction in the profession, right, is if you're not getting what you need or what you want out of the place you're working for, but for some reason you feel like you've got to work there, there are so many other opportunities that you can take on yourself. I mean, like what we've done with this podcast, or what you've done with the missing 32%. They lead to so many opportunities in the profession that are something you would never get in your firm anyway.
Never, yes.
There's so much opportunity out there, and it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman at all. I mean, everybody's voice has a place in this industry, in one way or another. And I feel like, take it upon yourself to start something. And it doesn't have to start huge, right? You need to be methodical, and you need to just start. That's the most important thing. So if you've got an idea about how you can do something for this profession, start doing it on your own. If your firm's not going to support you doing it, go home after work and start working on it. Or
join, an organization that will support it, whether it's AIA or NCARB or whoever it is, USGBC, whoever is like you and your idea or your passion, try to find people that align with that passion, and you'll be surprised, how many people are like you out there.
Absolutely.
Just not in your firm.
We've said it several times on the podcast, and I say it almost not on a daily basis, but I say it a lot with the interns that work with me, is you make the career that you want. Don't wait for somebody else to make it for you. You've got to make your own decision. You've got to figure out what you want out of it. And if it's, working here, if this is going to satisfy you in your career, great. If it's something that you think you can change about the, firm, do that. But always make sure that you take control over what, your own design of your own career. Because really, nobody else has a stake in it but you.
That's right.
So, to what, you're doing, and to what, Evan said we're sort of doing. I mean, we're trying to shape what we want the profession of architecture to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if it's handed to you, it's probably not going to be something that you're going to be happy with, right?
Right.
So yeah, be a part of designing it.
Great. I'm curious, as Neil has attended the symposium, what you thought of the day. And, obviously I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off, making sure everything was organized or happening. So sadly, it's like going to a wedding or something where you're trying to attend to everybody. At the end of the day, you're just kind of looking back and scratching your head and wondering what happened.
Yeah, I don't remember my wedding at all.
I think the alcohol might have had something to do with that, but
no, it literally is exactly what Rosa said. It was running around, making sure everything was going smoothly.
He was managing the project.
He was managing.
Yes,
exactly.
Sorry.
Rosa, from my experience, what I saw was just an amazing thing that you did, which was you were the champion for women in the profession of architecture. By coordinating and organizing this event, you were that lightning rod that really just brought everybody together and made conversation happen. There were so many women at this event and a few men that joined. There were a few. But I think what I saw that I was most encouraged by were conversations happening amongst other women and everybody that was there, sharing experiences, sharing problems that they're having, and finding commonalities and finding potential solutions or getting ideas about what could be done. Right. Not just among the speakers that you featured and what they said, but just the conversations that were happening out in the hall and outside, and that's what I saw a lot of that, and just a lot of sharing of ideas and experiences and a lot of learning. And really, this is an event that is started and is now going to grow. It started with you volunteering to do the one speech, and now it became this, and boom, here's the symposium. A couple hundred people were there attending, and now it's growing. It's almost like this is the beginning of hopefully a movement to change that perception, that implicit perception. I think that's one of the things I picked up on when I was there, was that maybe I do have these biases that I'm not even aware of, and what do I do to try and change those?
Absolutely. And we had a great story. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the symposium, there was this woman named Pamela Tang who came to us when we first started the committee, and she was one of the missing 32%. She had gotten her degree back in the day in MIT, and then started having a family, and then she felt like she couldn't do justice to having a career and the family. She had 4 kids. So she took time off to raise all those kids. And then last year, her son said to her, Mom, I'm going off to college. It's your turn now. You should go back and pursue architecture like you've always wanted to. So she came to us and she said, what do I do? How do I, start? What needs to be done? And we were kind of dumbfounded. We all had our implicit bias that, she's so far behind, not just, that she's older and that, but the profession has changed, right? It's like being asleep, Rip Van Winkle, and all of a sudden waking up and then having to learn Revit and AutoCAD and to take all the AREs and, just where do you start? So we gave her this kind of laundry list of things that she needed to do. But I think all of us were implicitly doubting that she could actually do it. And, after a couple meetings, she left us and said, I need to go concentrate on these things. So we thought, oh, great. We probably scared her away. But a month before the symposium, she, contacted us, and she was one of our sponsors. And she said, thank you. You really encouraged me, and I wanted to give back. She basically took all her AREs and passed them. Wow. She taught herself Revit and AutoCAD. And the most impossible thing was, where is she going to find a job to get her IDP hours? Well, one of our missing 32% committee people also owns a small firm, and she, found qualities in Pamela that she wanted in a project manager. So she hired her, and they won a project where Pamela is now the project manager for that. And during the time that she was away from architecture, she had built up all these life skills, being on committees at the children's school, volunteering, and she learned all these things about management that came perfectly to fit with her new project and her new role. So, perfect storm, all these things happening, but she's such a powerhouse and so positive through this whole thing. It just goes to show, we started this series called Inspire on our website, and we're going to actually ramp that up into an Inspire campaign where we celebrate these stories of people, taking on the impossible or, overcoming their challenges in a way that, speaks, tenfold into inspiring others to do the same.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's interesting you say that because my wife, she was graduating right around the time when we got married, started teaching, just kind of shell-shocked at the whole, teaching profession. Then, we started to have kids, and, she taught for around maybe 3 to 5 years. Can't really remember how long, but she decided to take time off and, raise our kids and make sure that at least my daughter would get through, get to kindergarten, so that, and then she wanted to go back to teaching. And it was so interesting that she feels like she's a better teacher now, not because of anything more than all of the life skills that she had acquired as becoming a parent, interacting with, exactly what you said with this lady is, she, all these different interactions that she had, she felt like she was better suited to get into the, go back into the profession than she was, kind of doe-eyed and fresh out of school. So that's kind of interesting that you say that.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Elizabeth Chu Richter, the incoming AIA national president, at the end, she did a closing kind of keynote, and she revealed her story, which is it was similar to Pamela's in that, she had 3 kids. She took 12 years off from the profession, and she wasn't licensed at the time that she did that. And then she came back as well, got her license, became a partner at her firm, and then is now AIA national president, right? So it's kind of the kind of, I don't know, I'm so speechless.
It's awesome.
Yeah. No, I think what's great about that, Rosa, is that those women, Pamela included, are now role models. They're the role models that that we mentioned earlier with our own daughters. I notice it with mine. She looks up, and she even at 7 notices that, oh, there's only men in this show. What's up with that? And, or if there is a woman character, she's all behind that. And, like, hey, there's, this is, the main character is a woman, and that's a role model. So all of the women, including yourself, that are doing these things are becoming role models for all the other women in the profession. And I think, this is fantastic. This is what needs to happen, because the more of these role models that younger people in the profession see, and they like, oh, I see that person. They're the president of the AIA. I can do that, and that that glass ceiling is starting to crack. Certainly maybe
That's
within the AIA, with a woman president now. Or president-elect, I think she is, and or however they say that. So, that's very positive and very exciting. And, I'm thrilled by this. I'm thrilled by what's happening, and what you're doing and what you've done. I mean, the whole Equity by Design was such a fantastic symposium, and it really got a lot of people energized. I know there were many connections that were made, and through social media, hopefully a lot of those stay together.
Yes, and it's just the beginning. Part of the theme of the symposium was knowledge, discussion, action. So the knowledge is the survey data and the outcomes from that. And the discussion, after you get the depressing data, is to say, well, what are we going to do about it? And then finally, we're charging people to commit to action. What can each of us individually do to contribute? It could be small or large contributions, but these micro contributions add up to be the whole movement. So we do have on our website 15 things you can do to jumpstart equity today. And if you just take a look, one of them is actually listen to Archispeak podcast. Go figure.
Excellent.
And then we're also, I don't know if it's premature to say, but we've also been accepted to AIA National Convention in Atlanta to do a tasting menu version of the symposium for people that can attend convention.
That's great. I was going to ask if you guys were going to do anything there, because I feel like these get-togethers are what keeps that momentum.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. And then unofficially, we're going to be on tour, not officially, but the band's going out to, select places that we're getting sponsored to speak at all over the U.S. In the works, whether it's, at another AIA's event, but we're going to help them jumpstart, how do you get equity by design happening at your local AIA or your local firm even. And there's a lot of large firms that are interested in just implementing equity by design in their own practice. So that's really great news that we're having that kind of impact at that level.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear, and I'll have a link in there for for that blog post for the 15 things you can do to jumpstart equity in architecture, because I think we all need to read that and try and do these things every single day, and so that we can all be a part of the process and be aware of maybe some of these the implicit biases that we have. And I think one of the things I saw or heard during the symposium was that a lot of the women have these biases as well.
Yes, that's right.
And I was kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, we judge each other. We're worse than the men. Now, Rosa, speaking as a woman, how much of that causes, some of the problem of women in architecture? Yeah, I think we have to counter that because women are generally more scarce, than men. I think there's primarily there's a camp that says, well, I don't want to be called a woman in architecture. I just want to be an architect. Don't call me a woman in architecture. Nobody will notice. And that was me for the longest time. I just wanted to do good work, and I didn't want to be called out. And I thought I was invincible, and, people were gender blind, and nobody sees me as a woman architect, right? But then things started to change at those, the mid-career pinch points, especially with caregiving. And when, I went off to have my 2 kids, I started realizing more and more that, yes, there are things that happen, whether intentional or not, stereotypes or stigmas that we have against mothers, that there's this article about the mother penalty, the daddy bonus. And an implicit bias that we have is that, well, mothers should be the caregivers and dads should be the breadwinners. And when, we see mothers, we think, well, they're working part-time. And even to this day, I've been working full-time for the last 4 years. And in the last couple of months, I've had people ask me, oh, do you still take Fridays off? Or, oh, you have 2 kids, therefore you must be working part-time. So we kind of have this typecast of mothers that they can't do more than what they, possibly could do because they're balancing these kids. And some women say, yes, I want to spend more time with my kids, and they have every right to do so. But then there's women that want to still be in the profession, and they want to try to accomplish that through, work-life integration or flexibility. But they just need to be given the chance to say, I want to take on more. I think oftentimes there's a kind of stepping on eggshells about the employer thinking like, well, if I give her too much, I'll scare her away. Rather than assuming things, have the conversation, have a constant conversation about, hey, how are you doing? The on-ramping and the off-ramping, I think, is what we're calling it. Is this enough for you? Are you bored? Do you want to take on more? How are you feeling? Just asking those simple questions. I constantly say, I can handle it. I can handle it. And they and I've heard, but you're, you have the 2 kids and you shouldn't, or do you really want to travel? Do you want to do this? And I think it's up to the woman to say, yes, I want to do more, right? Before we assume that she doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like communication is lacking on so many fronts inside the hierarchies here.
Definitely. And go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, but don't you think that's kind of in a way it's interesting because you say that the way that we want to treat or at least integrate women who have families and things like that into the profession and make sure that they've got the time for family and work and stuff. And I know I just watered it all down, so I apologize.
Okay.
But I think in a way it should be that the profession in general should, and it's not the steering it from being a man architect and woman architect. It's architect in general, but it's, I think that the way that this profession seems to operate in just the expectation of hours, regardless of who you are.
That's right.
Needs to change and start to understand that the millennials that we're talking about on a previous show where we were like they don't want to put in the work or the effort and stuff. No, it's they just don't want to work these crazy insane hours that we now just think is part and parcel to the profession. And maybe it's not just looking at how we can get one side or the other side to integrate family or integrate private, their own personal lives and stuff, but just kind of blend it all together so that we can start to be aware of, how insane the hour demand is on everyone.
Yes. I think that it starts with asking for enough fee. It's so important at that contract negotiation phase to get enough fee to support the right amount of staff so that you're not understaffed and then expecting people to make it up with 3 hours, right?
Yes.
And that's why we emphasize negotiation. We had a breakout session called Negotiation is Your Power Tool. And typically there was a survey done about just people negotiating in general, men or women. And there's 5 different, they call styles of negotiation. So the most risk averse, or one called avoidance. And most architects are avoiders. And rather not talk about it, like, oh, I need to go ask for additional services. Well, if I put it off, maybe later, it'll happen. Well, guess what?
Never happens. Yeah.
Away. If you don't ask for it when it happens, or you don't train the client to expect that, you're not going to nickel and dime them, but at the same time, what's fair is fair.
Right.
If you don't train in that expectation, it's just a losing battle. The more service you provide for free, it's never ending. The more that they're going to say, well, last time you didn't charge me additional service. Why are you starting now? Right. So
I'm only laughing because I'm living it right now.
We have to stop that habit
on so many different levels. It could go through a laundry list, and you're like, "You're the problem. Stop it."
We're gonna have a 12-step program.
So, Rosa, I want to take a step back, and I mean, we've talked a lot about the event, and we've touched on a number of things that happened and some of the positive things that came out of it. But I want to take a step back and ask you, what are you most surprised, one, and maybe two, happy about everything that's been happening with the entire missing 32%?
Sure. Surprised. I think the amount of volunteer effort and sponsorship and support that's come out of this, the people that came to the symposium were from all over the U.S. We had people, taking time off from work, flying out, paying for their own plane ticket, hotel, everything, just to come to be with us. And I was just astounded by the number of people that did that. And we had speakers, like Emily Grandstaff-Rice, Mark LePage, and even Stu Friedman, who is our closing speaker, mostly on their own dime, come out to be with us. And I'm truly grateful and thankful for that. And it just speaks. And I also have to thank the planning committee and the missing 32% committee throughout this whole year. People have been stepping up. They've been held accountable for what they promised to do, and they've delivered and over-delivered, every single day. We've asked people to pull crazy hours for this project, all for the sake of being able to expand the conversation. So I'm really surprised and thankful for the amount of effort and passion that people have for this conversation. And I forgot the second part of the question. What was the second part?
No, I think that was it. What have you gotten out of this for yourself?
Okay. I think I mentioned before to you, Neil, that I had worked with Steve Jobs, and the reality distortion field, came into play a lot, where I was trained in, school and whatnot to say, well, if it doesn't work, you have to say it. Well, it doesn't work. And he would always ask, well, why? Why doesn't it work? And then you'd have to pause and think about it again in that light. And basically, he taught us to think anything was possible. If you apply yourself and you are determined, and, time is your enemy or your friend in that regard. If you're against the clock, you have a shorter amount of time to make the impossible possible. But with this process, I kind of recaptured that what seemed like it was an impossible task, the whale eating, and it still seems like it some days, has become possible through belief. That there is a greater good that I'm here to contribute to, and through determination and just asking. If you don't ask, you don't get, or if you don't pursue, you don't achieve, right? So everything that we've done, early on in my career, and then transforming itself into the social impact, reteaches me every day that that can happen. If you dream it, you can achieve it.
That's a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably a good place to wrap up this conversation for this episode.
Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And we'll put all kinds of links so that people can find out more if this is the first time hearing about you guys, which I doubt, but they can go through those links and learn more and read and research and get in contact with you there, I'm sure, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And help start the conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or continue it.
Yes. And start an action. Do something every day.
Great.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Rosa, for spending the time to be on the episode. We really appreciate it, and everything that you're doing with Equity by Design and the Missing 32% project. And as you've said during the episode, this is only the beginning. So stay tuned. There is more coming.
Absolutely. And thanks for giving us a bigger voice.
Yeah. Anything that we can do to help.
All right. Thank you again.
Cheers.
This is what you get.